So did you know that the wait list for an ADHD assessment in the UK is up to 8 years with some local authorities? That's absolutely mind-blowing to me. I've just come off the back of a radio interview with the BBC where we were talking about the impact of having to wait so long for a diagnosis. So I wanted to record a video that might help you if you are someone that's waiting for a diagnosis and feel absolutely devastated that that wait list is so long. The first thing I am going to say is that it may not be as long for you depending on the area that you are in. So every local authority trust will have a different wait list. So if you are waiting to be referred or you've been referred, it's worth checking with your GP what your local services are. When I was first referred for diagnosis, there was a 4-year wait list. And I remember being, really kind of broken and upset and worried about the fact I was going to have to wait so long to get a diagnosis. And so much so that I actually ended up going privately. I was in a really fortunate position that I could save some money and afford to go for a private diagnosis. Now, something I want to mention around that is if that is something you are thinking about doing, please check with your GP to make sure that if you're going down a private route, you are going with an NHS approved partner. Now, this actually used to be easier to do before the Panorama programme came out around 18 months, 2 years ago from the time of recording. And there was a big expose on lots of the private diagnostic clinics that were doing 20-minute interviews and then diagnosing and prescribing medication. So that made a big difference in the number of GPs that would actually take on board the private diagnosis. That's really important for you if you're somebody that is going to be prescribed ADHD medication, because if you have a private diagnosis, what would initially happen if you are prescribed medication is you would be prescribed by the private clinic, and then you go through a process of something called titration, which is where it's a shared care agreement. You're handed to your GP, who can then prescribe your medication when it's stable on the NHS. So you're essentially paying an NHS prescription fee. The difficulty comes if you're not with an NHS partner and your NHS trust don't recognise the private practitioner that you have gone for an assessment with. That could mean that you end up having to pay for your medication on a private basis long term. That can be into the hundreds of pounds on a monthly basis. So what I would recommend is if you're considering private assessment, go via your GP and ask who the NHS partners are. That's really important. So that's the first part. There is still likely to be a wait for that, but it may be that is less than if you were just on the direct NHS wait list. This is the UK that I'm talking about. If you are somebody that is on a long wait list and you feel completely devastated by that and as if you're stuck, I want to share a little bit of information with you and some reflections post-diagnosis for me, and then point you in the direction of some things that might be able to help you. So when I was diagnosed, it did really help me in terms of I gone through my life labelling myself as stupid, useless, unworthy, incapable. I'd have told you I was rubbish at adulting. That was the narrative that I had. So a diagnosis for me gave me a different lens to look through. It gave me that validation and the ability to understand I wasn't stupid, I wasn't lazy, and that these were things that I had struggled with, and there was a reason for that. So that really, really helped me to process kind of everything that I'd had up until this point. And it was almost instant that I dropped that shame and negative narrative that I'd carried with me all of my life. That was really important. The second part was it gave me the ability to start to understand myself, so I could think about what my autism and ADHD are for me and where they show up in my life and have an impact. And that's the really important part, and that's something that you can move forward with now. Your diagnosis, a clinical diagnosis, number one, is not what makes you neurodivergent. Yes, it gives you a confirmation that you're ADHD or autistic if you're also going down that route. And it can help with that validation of like, okay, I've got this absolute reason. But the reality is that self-diagnosis is actually the first step. So if you are recognising a lot of what other people are saying about ADHD, if you are aware that you have some of those similar struggles and similar challenges, then you can start to get to really know how your brain works, start to bring awareness to that, and you look at the things that you find easier or come more naturally to you, and consider the things that are your strengths and where you can, show up in your life and feel really good about that. We often really focus on our challenges and the negative elements because that's what we will have been focused on right through education and, through the rest of our lives. So there's quite a lot of research that supports the fact that, by the age of 10 to 12, depending on which research you look at, it's estimated that if you have ADHD, you will have received around 20,000 additional pieces of negative feedback than somebody who doesn't have ADHD. And that is huge. The impact of that is that by the ages of 7 and 8, we've often formed the belief we're not good enough, we're not smart enough, we're not, we're not clever enough. So we're holding that belief from a really young age. You come up through the school system that is very outdated, in my opinion. School systems are, very much still teaching similar ways and similar things that they were teaching many, many decades ago. And they're not really structured around supporting neurodiversity. So therefore, everybody and their different ways of thinking, the way their brains function. So we come up through the school system being told that we need to try harder, we're easily distracted, we need to do more, we can apply ourselves when we put our minds to it. All of these things. And that transitions. And so what we're used to is negative feedback. And what can happen for many of us is we develop the negative narrative. So whenever we're doing things that we don't think are good enough, or we feel like we're failing or we're flawed in some way, that's what's happening internally for us, that internal criticism and do better, try harder, or why can't you do that messaging. We don't focus on the things that we're really good at and look at where we can maximise those, because that's not the experience we've had to that point. So I think if you can start to really reflect and think, actually, on this side, there are things I'm really good at, things that motivate me, energise me, come easily to me, and you will have some of those things. You're also likely to focus an awful lot on the things that you don't feel that you do well, whether that's through your own perception, whether that's through what you've been told by others, and gather the evidence that supports where you're failing or flawed, or you perceive that you are. And what you can start to do is apply a different lens to that. So rather than just having that negative narrative, start to give yourself some self-compassion. You don't need a formal diagnosis to allow yourself that grace. But if you can take the time to really understand what it is you find challenging, look at it through the lens with a self-understanding that you are ADHD or autistic, and then start to look at where you can make some changes in your life. Now that's probably going to seem really overwhelming to you if you're listening to this video thinking, I just don't know where to start. What I'm going to do is I'm going to pop some links to some free resources that you can get your hands on below the video. And I'm going to put a link to a blog I do over on Medium. So Medium's a blogging platform and it's an interactive blog. So what I really love about that is, first of all, it's a space where I share much more about my personal experiences that aren't related to like the business world or entrepreneurship. It's really deep diving into some of the struggles of friendships, personal relationships, the negative narrative. Those things can be really helpful. But what's great about Medium is you're going to see the comments that other people are posting. So you start to get a feel that you're not alone. You're not going through this alone. And people share their tips and experiences so we can learn from each other. We can support each other. So I really hope that the resources I share give you some tools you can work with, so that, yes, it is very distressing to be waiting, whether it's 2, 4, 6, 8 years for a diagnosis, but I really want you to understand that you can start to make some changes now. The difference with an ADHD diagnosis, yes, you might be referred to take medication. I can't take medication. I was recommended medication. I can't take it because I have a heart condition. So I'm not standing here talking to you as somebody who has ADHD and is medicated and therefore has, in essence got support in that way for things like my focus or my distractibility, because I don't. There are things that I've had to do to change my life, my structure and the way that I work that allows me to embrace my neurodivergent brain rather than try and fight it. So when you're thinking about the fact you can't do anything because you don't have a diagnosis because you need medication, I want you to just kind of be open to looking at different tools and different ways that you might be able to support yourself. And medication only helps with one part or a small part of ADHD. And actually some of the tools and techniques that I share, you would use alongside medication, even if that is something that you choose to take further down the line. I'm going to make some recommendations on some supplements that I take. Little caveat on that, before you take supplements, please speak to your doctor or get some advice, because supplements can interfere with medical conditions, can interfere with medications, but they're just some things that you can start to look at that might help with your focus. If you need any support, please reach out to me. I'm very happy to have a chat with you. You can follow me on all the socials, which is at Autistic Joyologist. You can reach out to me on LinkedIn, which is Nikki Butler, Autistic Joyologist, and I will pop the blog to the Medium link so you can start to engage with other people that are going through similar experiences to you. Really, really hope that helps. Reach out if you need anything, and I will see you very soon.